Hello and welcome to the Spiked podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, and with me this week, as ever, we have Spiked deputy editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And Spiked columnist Ella Whelan.
Hi.
Coming up on the show, Extinction Rebellion, rainbow-coloured hate crime cars, the Nirvana baby, and the tiger who came to tea. So, Extinction Rebellion are back. Their antics have been clogging up London streets all this week and going into next week. Tom, what have you made of it?
It's very easy to lampoon Extinction Rebellion, of course, and there's no real but to that because it's really good fun. I mean, they do look like a kind of collection of art school students who got lost on the way back from a psytrance rave, along with a few vicars. There's always a lot of religious people, kind of older home counties religious people into the mix. They kind of united the white, middle and upper classes in all its diversity whenever you see them pop out onto the streets. And of course, all of the kind of theatrics they get up to, the kind of dram, doomsday set pieces that they play out each time they set about London. Now, obviously, there's a whole lot of disruption which takes place, which irks a lot of people. And one of the conversations that I think has been recurring a lot this week, now that the shine has come off them a little bit, is this idea of, aren't you going to alienate people? You know, aren't these tactics going to put people off? I think last time around when Extinction Rebellion was shutting down London, there were some polls suggesting more than half of the population didn't like their tactics and all the rest of it. But I think that's kind of the wrong question, really, because one thing about Extinction Rebellion is that not only do they seem precision designed to put off ordinary people, but they don't really care what they think. I wrote about this on Spike this week, because really the dynamic that exists, as far as I can see, is you kind of have a kind of manifestation of the cultural elite in a slightly more extreme, absurd form, putting pressure on the political elite to enforce eco-austerity quicker than the current timetable.
Yeah.
You know, really, if we're talking about it, the government agrees more than it disagrees with Extinction Rebellion. You know, the government want net zero by 2050, which comes with all kinds of costs that we've previously talked about. Extinction Rebellion want it by 2025, which no one serious thinks is plausible, regardless of the cost anyway. And that's one of the things that I think people get wrong about it, is that this isn't even trying to be a sort of like grassroots movement that is trying to inspire people to take this particular issue seriously. They're just trying to kind of shame the government into more and more drastic courses of action. So I think one thing when we're thinking about this movement is not to always ask that question of, you know, don't you think you're alienating people? I think they've got that baked in really at this point.
Ella?
Yeah, I mean, and lots of people, as Tom said, have been sort of tut-tutting at the rather farcical nature of their kind of street theatre. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But the problem is that when you do things like that, when you do stunts or when you try and draw attention, what you're really supposed to be doing on a popular demonstration is drawing in support towards you, both from people on the street and from publics watching. And the idea is that you gain popular support to then use that, weaponize that to change the minds of politicians. But as Tom says, the Extinction Rebellion are very open about the fact of wanting to shortcut that democratic process and just go straight to either passing laws or getting statements produced like they have done, you know, declaring a climate emergency. You know, this whole line that Greta Thunberg used and has now been popularized as you know, your house is on fire, you've basically got to run away from the problem. And that's all very well for people who come from the home counties, who can, you know, walk from their really lovely cottage to the village shop and buy the organic carrots and walk the dog and be very, very eco-friendly. But particularly if you're in London, the people who are waiting in the queues in the traffic in their diesel vans, who are being pillarized and inconvenienced by Extinction Rebellion, don't have that choice. And there's this real bizarre kind of and ignorant dichotomy that Extinction Rebellion, their supporters, put up, that anyone who's against them is a like fossil fuel loving cretin who has no appreciation of the planet, when that just isn't the case.
We also learnt this week that Gail Bradbrook, one of the three co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, drives her own diesel car. And there's been a lot of kind of eco-hypocrisy to come out over the past few weeks. You know, we learned that it's okay for them because they always have an excuse, whereas other people, when they drive their car, when they go on holiday, you know, they're a drain on the planet, they're being selfish. But, you know, Gail Bradbrook has her own needs. She has to drive her kids to rugby. Or, you know, the other thing is that she's been in trouble for was going on a trip to Costa Rica, which is fine and enriching. Whereas your trip to Malaga, no thanks.
No, the run of eco-hypocrisy, I think, has been really funny. First of all, because so much of it is focused on diesel cars as well, because we've had, obviously, Gail Bradbrook forced to admit that she still drives a diesel. We had Alok Sharma, obviously chairing the COP26 meeting, who's admitted that he hasn't got his electric car sorted out yet, and he still drives a diesel. Allegra Stratton, who's the kind of spokeswoman for COP26, another government appointee, saying that she drives a diesel, doesn't fancy an electric electric car yet. And, there's limits to this hypocrisy argument, I guess, because you almost get into a situation where you want everyone to be equally miserable or something like this. But I think it is telling insofar as the kind of lifestyle that they want to usher in is something that even the most kind of committed adherents don't actually want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to get rid of a cheap and reliable means of transport and replace it with an expensive and unreliable means of transport? Who wants to see less of the world? These are things that ultimately people don't want to do. So I think that hypocrisy is telling. But the other thing that I think is always worth bearing in mind here is that if you're talking about making flying, travel, even just your everyday life more complicated and more expensive, the elites are always going to find a way around that. Not only will they have the kind of moral excuses, I was jetting off to, address my climate change summit, so therefore there's some good in that, but also the fact they're going to be able to afford to do this kind of thing, do those ridiculous gestures people do of paying to plant some trees to offset their carbon emissions and all the rest of it. So it just gets down to that point that we always talk about when we talk about this issue, which is that class tension, which is so inherent to all of that. And I think Extinction Rebellion, in its kind of middle class silliness, to the detriment of working class people trying to get around London to do their job, it's just a kind of more explicit example of all of that.
And upper class in some cases, as you wrote this week. One of the co-founders is the descendant of a baronet. That clash probably was most apparent, I think it was in 2019 when we had the famous Battle of Canning Town, where ordinary commuters essentially dragged the protesters off the top of the DLR. Such was their frustration with this kind of idiotic stunt.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you try to stop. I think it was 2 protesters at Canning Town that were trying to stop probably a couple hundred people from getting to work. There's that when there is a real tension, and that people have pointed out, in that Extinction Rebellion, unlike many other protests and other protesters, get free rein to do really whatever the hell they want. And I think they should, because we should defend freedom of protest, particularly at a time when Priti Patel and others are trying to clamp down on it. But the police are enjoying the music, standing alongside, facilitating it. Fine. That doesn't happen with a lot of other protests, and we've seen recent ones, whether it be in relation to Brexit, whether it be in relation to anti-lockdown protests, the police come in hard and heavy when they want to. There's nothing wrong with having a few baronets on your picket line, on your protest, but I think one of the points that you made really nicely in your piece this week, Tom, was that even for the protesters themselves, it's more about a kind of bourgeois desire to kind of self-fulfill rather than changing the world. So you have this sense of, when you see interviews with the protesters, they say things like, I just felt like I had to do something. I just couldn't sit by. Or maybe they might extend it to their kids, saying, I just had to do this for my kids. It's never about the world. It's never about society. It's very rarely about other people. It's more often than not about themselves and how they felt about their green conscience. And there is a limit to the extent to which that is, radical. There's a limit to the extent to which that's interesting for anyone.
Obviously, it is presented as being about the world, but you're right, it is a kind of projection. The Extinction Rebellion claim that billions of people are going to die from the climate is just idiotic. I think what you find is that people are able to kind of wallow in this because they have all this spare time, because they, have comfortable lives. And I remember, the Gilets jaunes in France, they were protesting against an eco-tax, much kind of lighter measure than anything Extinction Rebellion would want to impose. But they had this great saying, it's like, you worry about the end of the world, I'm worried about the end of the month. And, but reality just doesn't figure for these people. The realities of how people have to get to work, how people have to, make money, that just doesn't feature anywhere in the Extinction Rebellion mindset.
I think part of this as well is that it's not really about politics in some sense. You don't just see this with Extinction Rebellion, but in general, there's a kind of tendency through which particularly kind of bourgeois pseudo left-wing protest has just become a kind of spectacle. It's something you do. It's like a means of self-expression. I am a good person. I am part of something. I had to do something in a really kind of thin and denuded sort of way. I think it's no accident that you see so much street theatre at these things, because it is a performance in so many ways. But then on the political side and on the content of the arguments that they're making, I think the other thing that you see so clearly is how anti-democratic it is. Because even in the rhetoric of saying this is a emergency, this is a climate emergency, obviously it's one of their original demands. Parliament actually, declared a climate emergency back in 2019 in the wake of the first round of protests. That's not just the fact that they've got this wrong and that they have this really alarmist kind of perspective on what's going to happen, but it's actually because of the fact that if you employ that kind of language of emergency, crisis, we must do something, then what you're talking about is emergency measures. You're talking about bypassing what people want. You're talking about drastic changes to living standards, basically these decisions taken over the heads of people that they will most affect. And that's one thing that I think it's worth taking note of in relation to this, and also taking note of the fact that a lot of that language, if not the full extremity of it, has been adopted by the political class in a way that would be unthinkable even amongst Labour Party people, say 10 years ago. So there has been a huge shift, and it's a shift not just towards kind of climate alarmism, if you like, but also towards anti-democracy, to the end of sorting that out. And that's becoming more and more clear, definitely.
Yeah, you see that shifts of language in, the Guardian style guide. I mean, I know the Guardian is not so far away from Extinction Rebellion's views, but, the fact that they're not even allowing their writers to say climate change, they have to say climate emergency, they have to say climate breakdown, they have to say climate crisis, is really telling. And
it also ridicules the notion of the idea that climate change is an important thing to talk about. I mean, most people, as polls show, are relatively sick of Extinction Rebellion. Most people look at the goings on of Trafalgar Square and all of that and think this is what we're saying. It's just a bunch of people having a good time. This is stupid. And if that means that a discussion about what to do with the planet, what to do with energy, how to find new ways of heating our houses and all the rest of it without harming the planet gets sidelined by people thinking that this is just a whole bunch of nonsense, well, that's a bad thing. Because while those of us who think Extinction Rebellion are a kind of bunch of idiots also don't think that there's nothing to talk about in relation to the environment. And it's so kind of binary now that you either have to be full guns blazing a kind of Extinction Rebellion nutter, and Michael Gove and lots of other people in Parliament seem to be going that way, or you are a dinosaur who is like sucking on an exhaust pipe and doesn't want to talk about climate change or environment of the planet at all. And there has to be some kind of, not middle ground, but there has to be some kind of understanding that binary kind of decision is ridiculous.
I think just one thing though is that in a way this isn't an argument about the climate in so many ways, shape or form, not only because a lot of these claims are so over the top, but it's ultimately a complete reframing of what politics and civilization is supposed to be about, insofar as basically holding up the welfare of the planet in some abstract sense over and above the immediate living standards of people, over and above human progress in general, over and above things like economic growth, which are amongst these people, amongst quite mainstream Greens, is basically seen as a thing of the past that we can no longer afford. And they explicitly say, really, that we have to put up with less. And so whilst a lot of this is obviously kind of inspired by the climate issue, if you like, I think so much of it is informed by that kind of misanthropy, that discomfort with modern society, that idea that it's all wasteful and kind of unpleasant and kind of soulless, where you get, I guess, some of the kind of weird cod spirituality amongst these people as well. That in a way is also what it's about, and also about, how should a society like this be governed, which in their view is whether they want to admit it or not, is a very authoritarian way of dealing with these problems.
You're watching the Spiked podcast. While you're here, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell so you never miss a video. But even better, to keep up with all of Spike's content, all of our brilliant articles and essays that we publish every weekday, you should sign up to our newsletter, Today on Spiked. Every weekday, you'll get a roundup of all of Spike's content, plus some exclusive commentary. To sign up, just go to spiked-online.com/newsletters and click Today on Spiked. That's spiked-online.com/newsletters and Today on Spiked. Now, back to the Spiked podcast. Let's talk a bit about the police. The British police have been given a kind of fabulous rainbow makeover. A lot of people will have seen these rainbow cars patrolling around their areas. The police have actually come out and defended this move, calling them hate crime cars. And the idea is that they're supposed to encourage people to come forward and report some of their hate crimes they've experienced or witnessed. I mean, Tom, what have you made of this?
I think it's interesting because they're obviously on the defensive a little bit with this stuff. So not just with some of these squad cars, which have been noticed with the kind of rainbow flag on them, but, police officers kind of going around in the rainbow flag or dancing at pride parades or TikTok videos, all this kind of silly, basically a kind of extended PR campaign to try and curry favour with sections of society, which for obvious reasons have a slightly more difficult relationship with the police because of recent history. So they were clearly on the defensive about it. But I think one of the things that's important to point out in all of this is how slippery it is, because it presents itself as in some ways you could just dismiss it as sort of naff and try hard and all the rest of it. But there's a very dark underside to it, which is the increasing policing of speech, really, because hate crime is one issue. You wrote about that more specifically this week, so I should probably let you get into that. But there's a clear slippage going on between hate crime, hate speech, and then this non-crime hate incidents issue as well. And it's never entirely clear what it is that the police are trying to raise awareness about and trying to police people for. You know, first of all, it seems like the police don't really understand this distinction. There was that famous case, I forget, was it a year or so ago?
Early this year.
Was it early this year?
In the middle of the lockdown, funny
Of course. Merseyside police, so I think it was like February or something, must have been, where they turned up outside an Asda with a digital ad van saying, being offensive is an offence. They later had to put out a clarification saying that it wasn't an offence, which isn't really a clarification at all. It's the complete opposite of what they just said. But it's quite clear that a lot of this is not just about dealing with hate crime as most people might understand. It's someone getting beaten up in the street because of who they are, or you know, kind of racist vandalism to the end of intimidating people or whatever.
Or harassment. Or
harassment,
like
exactly. Something quite separate and different, and something which people are going to obviously want to take seriously. But hateful speech, however defined, as well as this particularly Orwellian non-crime hate incidents thing, whereby someone can just be reported for saying or doing anything. It doesn't even have to be the person it was directed at, and these things get logged and can show up on extended background checks. So that's the kind of authoritarian, concerning underside to what just looks like quite a naff PR exercise. And it seems like not only the police getting more and more interested in policing hate in its various different forms, but they seem to have no real clue where the law begins and ends, where hate speech and hate crime begin and end. And that's a really concerning space to be in, definitely.
And one of the strange things that is driving this is the assumption that there is all of this hate crime going on, that the police are somehow not picking up, that not enough people are coming forward. And so you get awareness-raising campaign after awareness-raising campaign. But it seems pretty clear, looking at some of the data, that actually, if anything, hate crime is going down. Every year you get the headline figure that says hate crime is growing up, but this is a kind of separate thing. This is called police recorded hate crime. And we know that they keep changing the way that they record it. They keep finding improvements in the method of recording it, and they keep encouraging people to come forward. So that explodes every year, and that causes an outcry. But on every other measure of hate crime, the measures that have stayed the same, it's going down. So there are fewer prosecutions for hate crime than there were 5 years ago. There's a way of measuring crime called the Crime Survey for England and Wales. Hate crime has gone down 40%, according to that, over the past 10 years. So the whole thing, the whole campaign is driven by this urge to root out this crime that really, you know, is either not happening or is not happening on anywhere near the scale that they imagine.
I remember you also writing an article a few months ago, maybe it was longer, Fraser, about the fact that so much when you dig into what gets reported as hate crime can be something like someone letting their dog shit in front of someone's house too many times, or a neighbour
These are
playing
the
too much.
non-crime hate incidents that get confused by the police.
And it all gets mixed into with the same thing, and you as the label as hate crime. There's also the fact that, you know, the police are driving around with these nice new vehicles that look very, you know, snazzy and welcoming. There's news in my area at the moment in Stamford Hill that there has been repeated attacks on Orthodox Jews, violent attacks with this guy walking around just battering people. And actually it's been happening for a while in the neighbourhood, and there are lots of Jewish schools up in and around Stamford Hill and back towards Manor House that have to have security guards. This has been a problem that's happened for years now, actually, since some of the terror attacks across Europe. No real discussion about that. I mean, are the police cars around there going to start driving around with Stars of David on them? What's the solution there? So there's a real superficiality to this. But also the kind of policing of hate, in a way, sucks the politics out of each kind of specific incident of what's going on. So even, you know, on a silly level, the rainbow flag does actually stand for something, you know, or used to stand for something in relation to gay rights. We now know, because we've covered it on this podcast, it's been extended with triangles and different colours, and actually probably
the circles.
The rainbow flag is probably out of date now in the world of gender and sexuality. But the police seem to be using it as just a sign of niceness, because it can't be the case that they're only dealing with hate crime against gay and lesbian trans people. And so then what you have is this suggestion that things that happen where if someone shouts the N-word at someone, or someone does something that's hateful and politically motivated, that's about prejudice, that really what it is about just the police getting involved and finding out who's been nasty to someone. So you end up having this very kind of nebulous discussion about what hate is, rather than talking about how we combat prejudice or bad things in society on a political level. The solution, particularly this happens a lot with hate crime in the discussion about women and the suggestion now that misogyny should be a hate crime, which I think they've pushed through in Parliament, is that the idea that police in a rainbow car coming up and making you feel good about reporting the fact that someone wolf whistled you is going to save women and ensure women's freedom is a completely apolitical way of looking at what it means to be fighting for equality or a better society. So in that way, it's like giving the police way more power than they should have, not just on a practical level of being able to arrest people, but also the suggestion that they are the saviors of society. And that's not actually how change happens.
I think the Stamford Hill case is really revealing as well, is that when what passes for the left talk about this issue nowadays, they only really care about hate crime such as this when it's politically expedient to do so. I mean, that's just entirely obvious at this point. So, I mean, the last big round of discussion about hate crime we had was, of course, in the wake of the Brexit vote.
Yeah.
Whereas a combination of factors, it seems like, you know, the bringing in of these non-crime hate incidents a couple of years prior to the vote. So therefore, those statistics being things that people could reach for. And as you've both said, those two are often conflated, certainly in the media, as well as the fact that in the wake of the Brexit vote, particularly on the part of the Mayor of London and all the rest of it, there was a pretty concerted effort to trawl essentially for allegations of this, which could then be reported.
Sadiq Khan set up a new unit just for online hate crime specifically in 2017 after Brexit.
So of course that's going to lead to more reporting. And as you say, that's not to say that all of those are going to be bogus. Of course not. But at the same time, if you look at the longer term trends and the prosecutions, all the rest of it, it's quite clear that that's not really an issue. But you take something like the Stamford Hill example, and they don't care about it. And it's not to say that if they were confronted by it, they would just be relaxed about it. I'm sure that's not the case. But it's because they are struck by this kind of identitarian mindset, which has a hierarchy of victims, of which, as we all know, Jews come quite low down in because they're considered privileged and all the rest of it. And there's a hierarchy of perpetrators as well, because obviously this is still ongoing. They haven't caught the guy as far as I can tell yet, but he does seem to present as a quite traditionally dressed Muslim man. And that doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah.
And so therefore, you shouldn't talk about it. It doesn't become something that you hold a big solidarity rally for. It becomes something which is just quietly brushed under the carpet. And it just shows that, particularly because of the fact that more almost than anything else, I think the modern left defines itself for its anti-racism, quote unquote. When you see cases like this, you see how thin that is. You know, this is about pushing their particular narrative and their particular politics. And any case which doesn't fit that, then the solidarity isn't there. And I think that particular case is a pretty strong example of that, because I think if some of the factors were different, it would be a conversation which could dominate discussion for a week, and yet it's something which is largely confined to a few news stories and discussion on social media here and there at the moment.
Let's talk about the latest cultural icon that we are now being told is evil. This is the iconic album cover for Nirvana's 1991 album Nevermind. Famously features a naked baby in a swimming pool grasping after a dollar bill. The man who appeared as the baby, Spencer Eldon, is now suing Nirvana, including the estate of Kurt Cobain, claiming that the picture is child pornography, that he was essentially entrapped into a sex act against his consent, and that it has completely ruined his life, prevented him from getting a job, prevented him from getting an education, and from generally enjoying himself. I mean, this is a real sign of the times, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, aside from the fact that you can look at this and say, Americans have a penchant for suing people, and like he just wants his check and whatever. There's a
reaching
cynical
for that dollar bill.
Yeah,
you do have to obviously, you do have to lay it on thick, don't you? When you're trying to get some money out.
Particularly the fact that he posed for recreations of the picture twice.
Yeah.
So there's a little
and
bit.
And once offered to do so naked. As well.
Yeah,
quite recently. So.
But it has to be said, the claims are shocking but not surprising, because we now are in the kind of world that we're in. These claims of particularly the idea that a picture like this of a naked baby is kind of child pornography, or that you would read sick elements into that quite beautiful and iconic photo of it being exploitative, is not uncommon. So we have the kind of twisting of descriptions of abuse or even actually of kind of sexual exploitation and pornography now, where you can really claim that anything has bad motives if you take it out of context. And so in that way, it's quite a telling case, because these, the kind of claims of victimhood in particular are becoming commonplace. I mean, it's also true that there, specifically around images of children, there's a trend now to be and I have to pick my words carefully here, like kind of overcautious about how we depict kids. So I remember being threatened with being thrown out of a swimming pool when I was babysitting for having an underwater camera when we were obviously just all having fun. There's a kind of paedophile scare to all of this. There's also now trends for parents to be overly cautious of putting up pictures of their bouncing babies because kids are retrospectively criticizing parents for not getting their consent from their 2-year-old before they put up a picture of them in a nappy. So it's a real fraught nature around the way in which we talk about and depict kids, and also the fraught nature of the cult of victimhood, where you could have the very sad example of an adult claiming that he was physically and emotionally abused by his parents for becoming a star, which essentially is a star.
Yeah, and you can completely understand why you'd be conflicted about it. It is weird. To be associated with any iconic image is obviously a very weird thing. Everyone has seen it. I mean, he said, I think it was in 2007, I feel weird that the whole world has seen me naked. Fair enough. But how does it get from that sort of conflict, or, you know, that inner conflict, to this has literally ruined my life, I can do not, you know, my life is over?
Or it might be money, but we shouldn't be so cynical. But it is interesting, as you both say, that this is the kind of script that you can reach for now, not only because it taps into that kind of language of victimhood, but I think also when you're talking about culture, there's a willingness to kind of presume the worst about stuff that came before because it dealt in depictions that might seem uncomfortable now, or it dealt in language that we might seem uncomfortable now. So you kind of mash those two things together and you get this case in a strange sort of way. What's interesting, obviously, the response has been, I think, uniformly mocking, really. I don't think anyone's particularly taking it seriously. But in deploying that language of trauma and, you know, even to the point of suggesting he was basically a trafficked sex worker and all the rest of it, you do get a bit of an insight into how these things can be weaponized. This is probably just a much more crude and ill-fated attempt to do that, I guess.
Finally, let's talk about the Scottish charity that has carried out a gender and diversity audit of children's books in Scottish nurseries. The charity claims, essentially, that books which contain gender stereotypes then lead adults to commit violence against women. And one of the books it's singled out is the beloved Tiger Who Came to Tea by Judith Kerr. Ella, what have you made of this?
It's very sad, actually, because the claims against Judith Kerr's, who only recently died, which makes it even sadder, kind of famous and much loved children's book, is literally that the fact that the daddy at the end of it comes to save the day, that the tiger is male and predatory and eats all the food, and that the mummy is this kind of half silent housewife who doesn't really know how to cope. If you read the suggestion from the co-director of Zero Tolerance, is that if you read this book to nursery children, they will literally the boys will become rapists and assailants, and the girls will become victims. I mean, quite often these stories get blown out of proportion and people say, oh, that's not really what's happened, or you're making up cancel culture. So this is quite literally what Zero Tolerance is saying, is that
Zero Tolerance being the charity.
That there is a direct link, and they did this audit of all nursery books and kind of made this point that because so few, they actually said, books show a society that hasn't moved on since the 1950s. I mean, if you're going to take away those things from children's nurseries, you will be kind of ridding kids of an experience of, you know, Hans Christian Andersen, all the amazing books that were written before the 1950s, before 2021, that have wonderful imaginative things that provoke children's development. But there's the question about children's literature and censorship, and there's also, it has to be said, the adult discussion about what this means for women. Because if we are really saying that which is the suggestion here, that the only way to combat serious things like rape, sexual violence and assault is to get in there early with boys in nursery and read them inane books about how mummy is actually really fulfilled, then we're saying that women have no agency to change the world. It also has to be said that there's many people who read The Tiger That Came to Tea and don't see an oppressed 1960s mother and don't see a predatory tiger, but see a picture of a very happy family and quite a jolly tiger. So you end up thinking they're so incredibly miserable.
Maybe it is just about a tiger. I mean, Tom, what kind of sick parent reads their children The Tiger Who Came to Tea or Hans Christian Andersen when they could be reading their children Ibram X. Kendi's Anti-Racist Baby or one of those colouring books about Ruth Bader Ginsburg or something like that?
Exactly.
What are they thinking?
Shame on them. I mean, I think the rise of anti-racist babies, their feminist baby as well.
There's feminist baby book,
all this stuff. I mean, it reveals what we're talking about, isn't it? Which is like, I mean, what they're quite openly talking about is that basically politics in society is a game of indoctrination. You've got to get them young because otherwise they'll get that tiger book and they'll be messed up for life. You've got to get in there with the critical race theory and the feminism and everything will be fine. It's obviously utterly ridiculous. But at the same time, this is exactly what they're saying. And even though there's probably been a lot of pushback in a lot of courses because they have kind of overextended, kind of feminists in particular have thought a version of this for a very long time, or at least a certain section of feminism, shall I say, have believed that culture, music, films, video games, all that kind of stuff directly contributes to not only misogynistic and sexist attitudes in society, but actually rape and sexual violence and all the rest of it. They genuinely believe this. So this is almost like a reductio ad absurdum kind of example of it, but it's still, in case of it, is all of the same kinds of arguments, really. And it's also the sort of Stalinism of it, I guess, because they did this audit, was it like 3,000 books across a bunch of nurseries in Scotland? They found only a handful that, as far as they were concerned, passed this purity test. The example of saying, why isn't the tiger gender neutral? I mean, it's just like the idea that everything, even in this case, something which the family is not the main thrust of the story, really. You know, the family and their gender roles has got nothing really to do with it. Everything having to be politically correct in that kind of old, that old sort of quite Stalinist sense. It's ridiculous and it's joyless, I suppose, is the other thing. Imagine only ever seeing this when you look at anything, even a kid's book.
And it's also it's the point that parents the beauty of reading kids' stories is that you can fill it with whatever meaning you want because they're so simple. Emily Maitlis, when she was interviewing Judith Kerr, made Kerr laugh because she said, when I was reading it, I read into it that it was about 1960s sexual awakening and ethnic disparities and repression. And, you know, because you can do that. My mum told me that she was reading it thinking, actually, the mum all along has just eaten everything, can't be asked to clean up, and gets, you know, actually switches the gender roles and says the husband has to buy her a delicious sausage dinner, and
she pretends it's a tiger.
It's a feminist tome. And so, but the whole point is that as a parent, when you are reading, or as a nursery teacher, as an educator, when you are kids don't just do this in isolation. You recognize that their imagination should go and can go anywhere it wants. But when it comes to instilling, not indoctrinating, instilling kids with the kind of political and moral values and norms that you want, that doesn't come through an isolated instance of reading a book. It comes with a discussion with parents or your teachers. And so it's also a really reductive way of looking at the relationship between adults and kids.
Thank you so much for watching the Spikes podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spike's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.